Hello readers, welcome back to Reads with Room B. I hope you have all been fantastic while we've been away. I'm sorry for the lack of chapter last week. First, it was due to the Queen's funeral as a mark of respect for Her Majesty the Queen. And then I got caught up in birthday prep for my daughter's birthday. She turned 17 on Saturday. So, once again, I apologize. I have missed you all. I hope you all have had a fantastic time despite the sad news. And with that being said, let's get into our next chapter. We are on chapter 5. It's Wool and Water. And here is Alice with the White Queen. She is in quite a state after having lost her shawl. She caught the shawl as she spoke and looked about her for the owner. In a moment the White Queen came running through quite wildly, with both arms stretched out wide, as if she were flying, and Alice very civilly went to meet her with the shawl. "I'm very glad I happened to be in the way," said Alice, as she helped her put the shawl on again. The White Queen only looked at her in a helpless, frightened sort of way, and kept repeating something in a whisper to herself that sounded like bread and butter, bread and butter, bread and butter. And Alice felt that if there was to be any conversation at all, she must manage it herself. So she began, rather timidly, "Am I addressing the White Queen?" "Well, if you call that addressing," the Queen said, "it isn't my notion of the thing at all." Alice thought this would never do to begin having an argument at the start of their conversation. Let's try that again. Alice thought it would never do to have an argument at the very beginning of their conversation, so she only smiled and said, "If your Majesty will only tell me the right way to begin, I will do it as soon as I can." "But I don't want it done at all," groaned the poor Queen. "I've been addressing myself for the last 2 hours. It would have been all the better, it seemed to Alice, if she had got someone else to dress her. She was so dreadfully untidy, and every single thing was crooked. Alice thought to herself, "and she's all over the pins. May I put your shawl straight for you?" she added aloud. I don't know what's the matter with it," the Queen said in a melancholy voice. "It's all out of temper, I think. I pinned it here, I pinned it there, but there's no pleasing it." "It can't go straight, you know, if you put all the pins on one side," said Alice, as she gently put it right for her. "And dear me, what a state your hair is in." "The brush got tangled in it," the Queen said with a sigh, "and I lost the comb yesterday." Alice carefully released the brush and did her best to put the hair in order. "Come now, you look rather better," she said after altering most of the pins, "but really you should have a lady's maid. I'm sure you'll take to it with pleasure," the Queen said. 2 pence a week and jam every other day." Alice couldn't help laughing as she said, "But I don't want you to hire me, and I don't care for jam." "It's very good jam," said the Queen. "Well, I don't want any today, at any rate," replied Alice. "You couldn't have it if you wanted it," the Queen said. "The rule is, jam tomorrow, jam yesterday, but never ever jam today." "It must come sometimes to jam today," Alice objected. "No, it can't," said the Queen. "It's jam every other day, and today isn't an other day, you know." "I don't understand you," said Alice. "It's dreadfully confusing." "It's the effects of living backwards," the Queen said kindly. "It always makes one a little giddy at first." "Living backwards?" Alice repeated in great astonishment, "I have never heard of such a thing. But there's one great advantage in it, and there's that one's memory works both ways." "Well, I'm sure mine only works one way," Alice replied. "I can't remember things before they happen." "It's a poor sort of memory that only works backwards," said the Queen. "And what sort of things do you remember best?" Alice ventured to ask. "Oh, things that will happen the week after next," the Queen replied in a careless tone. "For instance, now," she went on, sticking a large piece of plaster on her finger as she spoke. "There's the king's messenger. He's in prison now, being punished, and the trial doesn't even begin until next Wednesday. And of course the crime comes last of all." "Suppose he never commits the crime," said Alice. "Wouldn't that be all the better?" the Queen said, as she bounded the plaster round her finger with a bit of ribbon. Alice felt there was no Alice felt there would be no denying that. "Of course it would be better," she said. "But wouldn't it be better not? Wouldn't it be all the better his being punished? But it wouldn't be all the better his being punished." "You're wrong there at any rate," said the Queen. "Were you ever punished?" "Only for faults," said Alice. "And you were all the better for it." "I know," the Queen said triumphantly. And here we have the king's messenger being punished for the crime he didn't commit until sometime last week. Very odd, if you ask me. But that's Wonderland for you. "Yes, but then I had done the things I was punished for," said Alice, "and that makes all the difference." "But if you hadn't done them," said the Queen, "that would have been better still. Better and better and better." Her voice went higher and higher with each better, till it got quite to a squeak at the last. Alice was just beginning to say there was a mistake somewhere, when the Queen began screaming so loud that she had to leave the sentence unfinished. "Oh! Oh! Oh!" shouted the Queen, shaking her hand as if she was about to shake it off. "My finger's bleeding. Oh! 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 It hurts!" Her screams were exactly like the whistle of a steam engine, that Alice had to have held both her hands over her ears. "What is the matter?" she said, as soon as there was a chance of making herself heard. "Have you pricked your finger?" "I haven't pricked it yet," said the Queen, "but soon I shall. Oh! 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 Dearie me, it hurts." "When do you expect to do it?" asked Alice, feeling very much inclined to laugh. When I fasten my shawl again," the poor Queen groaned. "The brooch will come undone directly." "Oh, no. Oh, dear," she said, as she said the words, the brooch flew open, and the Queen clutched at it wildly and tried to clasp it again. "Take care," cried Alice. "You're holding it all crooked." And she caught at the brooch, but it was too late. The pin had slipped, and the Queen had pricked her finger. "That accounts for the bleeding, you see," she said to Alice with a smile. "Now you understand the way things happen here." "But why do you scream now?" asked Alice, holding her hands ready to put them over her ears again. "Why, I've done all the screaming already," said the Queen. "What would be the good of having to do it all over again?" By this time it was getting light. "The crow must have flown away, I think," said Alice. "I'm so glad it's gone. I thought the night was coming." "I do wish I could manage to be glad," the Queen said. "Only I can never remember the rule. You must be very happy living in this wood, and being glad whenever you like." "Only it is so very lonely here," said Alice in a melancholy voice, and the thought of her loneliness, two large tears came rolling down her cheeks. "Oh, don't go on like that," cried the poor Queen, wringing her hands in despair. "Consider what a great girl you are. Consider what a long way you've come. Consider what o'clock it is. Consider anything. Only, oh please don't cry." Alice could not help but laughing at this, even in the midst of her tears. "Can you keep from crying by considering things?" she asked. "That's the way it's done," said the Queen with great decision. "Nobody can do two things at once, you know. Let's consider your age. Now, to begin with, how old are you?" I'm 7½ exactly." "You needn't say exactly," the Queen remarked. I believe it without that. Now I'll give you something to believe. I'm just 101, 5 months and a day. I can't believe that, said Alice. Can't you? The Queen said in a pitying tone. Try again, draw a long breath, and shut your eyes. She laughed. There's no use in trying. I can't believe impossible things. I dare say you haven't had much practice, the Queen said. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as much as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Ah, there goes my shawl again. The brooch had come undone as she spoke, and with a sudden gust of wind, it blew the Queen's shawl across the little brook. The Queen spread out her arms again and went flying after it, and this time she succeeded in catching it for herself. I've got it, she cried in a triumphant tone, and now you shall see me pin it on again all by myself. I hope your finger is better now, said Alice very politely, as she crossed the little brook after the Queen. Oh, much better, cried the Queen, her voice rising into a squeak as she went on. Much better. Better, 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 better. And the last word ended in a long bleep, like a sheep. And Alice was quite startled. She looked at the Queen, who seemed to suddenly have wrapped herself in wool, and Alice rubbed her eyes again and looked again. She couldn't make out what had happened. Was she in a shop? And was it really a sheep that was sitting on the other side of the counter? Rub as she would, she could make nothing more of it. She was in a little dark shop, leaning with her elbows on the counter, and opposite her was an old sheep, sitting in an armchair, knitting, and every now and again leaving off to look at her through a great pair of spectacles. And here is Alice and the sheep. What is it you want to buy? The sheep said at last, looking up from her knitting for a moment. I don't quite know yet, said Alice very gently. I should like to look around me first, if I might. You may look in front of you and on both sides if you like, said the sheep, but you can't look all around unless you've got eyes in the back of your head. But these, as it happened, Alice had not got, so she contented herself with turning around and looking at the shelves as she came to them. The shop seemed to be full of all manner of curious things, but the oddest part of it was that whenever she looked at any shelf too hard to make out what exactly was on it, that particular shelf was always quite empty, as though the others around it were crowded as full as they could hold. Things flow about so here, she said at last in a plaintive tone, as she spent a minute or two in vain pursuing a large bright thing that looked sometimes like a doll and sometimes like a workbox. I was always on the shelf next to the one she was looking at, and the most provoking of all. But I'll tell you, and this one is most provoking of all. But I'll tell you what, she added, with a sudden thought struck her. I'll follow it up to the very top of the shelves. It'll puzzle to go through the ceiling, I expect. But even this plan failed, and the thing went through the ceiling as quietly as possible, as if it were quite used to it. Are you a child or a teetotum? The sheep said, as she took up another pair of needles. You'll make me giddy soon, if you go on turning around like that. She was now working on her 14th pair. She was now working on with 14 pairs at once, and Alice couldn't help but looking at her in great astonishment. How can you knit with so many? Puzzled the child to herself. She gets more and more like a porcupine every minute. Can you row? The sheep asked, handing her a pair of knitting needles as she spoke. Yes, a little, but not on land, and not with needles, Alice said. And suddenly the needles turned into oars in her hands, and she found they were in a little boat, gliding along between the banks, and there was nothing for it but for her to do her best. Feather, cried the sheep, and she took up another pair of needles. And here is Alice and the sheep in the boat. This didn't sound like a remark that needed any answer, so Alice said nothing, but pulled away. There was something very queer about the water, she thought, as every now and again the oars caught fast in it and would hardly come out again. Feather, Feather, cried the sheep again, taking up more needles. You'll be catching a crab directly. A dear little crab, thought Alice. I should like that. Didn't you hear me say feather? The sheep cried angrily, taking up a bunch of needles. Indeed I did. You've said it so very often, and so very loud. Please, where are the crabs? In the water, of course, said the sheep, sticking some needles into her hair. But her hands were full. Feather, I say. Why do you say feather so often? Alice asked, rather vexed. I am not a bird. You are, said the sheep. You are a little goose. This offended Alice, so there was no more conversation for a minute or two, while the boat glided on gently, sometimes among beds of weeds, which made the oars stick fast in the water worse than ever, and sometimes under trees, but always with the same tall river banks frowning over their heads. Oh, please, there are some scented rushes, Alice cried, in a sudden transport of delight. There really are such beauties. You needn't say please to me about 'em, the sheep said, without looking up from her knitting. I didn't put them there, and I'm not going to take 'em away. No, I meant, please may we wait and pick some, Alice pleaded, if you don't mind stopping the boat for a minute. How am I to stop it? If you leave off rowing, it'll stop itself. So the boat was left to drift down the stream as it would, till it glided gently in among the waving rushes, and then little sleeves were carefully rolled up, and little arms were plunged elbow deep into the water to get hold of the rushes, a good long way down before breaking them off. And for a while Alice forgot all about the sheep and the knitting, and she bent over the side of the boat, with just the ends of her hair dangling into the water, while bright eager eyes she caught one bunch after another of the darling scented rushes. Oh, I only hope the boat won't topple over, she said to herself. Oh, what a lovely one. Only I couldn't quite reach it. And it certainly did seem a little provoking, almost as if it happened on purpose. She thought. Though she managed to pick plenty of beautiful rushes, as the boat glided by, there was always one more lovely one that she couldn't reach. The prettiest are always further, she said at last, with a sigh of obscenity, that the rushes are growing so far off. With flushed cheeks and dripping hair and hands, she scrambled back into her place and began to arrange her newly found treasure. What mattered to her just then was the rushes had begun to fade and lose all their scent and beauty from the moment she had picked them. Even real scented rushes, only last a very short while, and these, being dream rushes, melted away almost like snow as they lay in heaps at her feet. But Alice hardly noticed this. There were so many other curious things to think about. They hadn't got much further before the blade of one of the oars got fast in the water and wouldn't come out again. So Alice explained it afterwards. And the consequence was that the handling of it caught her under the chin in spite of a series of little shrieks of "Oh! Oh! Ow! Oh!" from poor Alice. It swept her straight from her seat and off the boat and down among the heap of rushes. However, she wasn't hurt one bit, and soon she was up again and into the boat. And soon she was up again and back onto her seat in the boat. So she just fell into the bottom of the boat. My apologies, reader. The sheep went on with her knitting all the while as if nothing had happened. "That was a nice crab you caught," she remarked. When Alice got back into her place, very much relieved to find herself still in the boat. "Was it? I didn't see it," said Alice, peeping cautiously over the side of the boat into the dark waters. "I wish I hadn't let it go. I should so like a little crab to take home with me." But the sheep only laughed scornfully and went on with her knitting. "Are there many crabs here?" said Alice. "Crabs and all sorts of things," said the sheep. "Plenty of choice, only make up your mind. Now what do you want to buy?" "To buy?" echoed Alice in a tone that was half astonished and half frightened, for the oars, the boat, and the river had all vanished in a moment, and she was again back in the dark little shop. "I should like to buy an egg," she said timidly. How do you sell them?" "5 pence farthing for one, 2 pence for two," replied the sheep. "Then 2 are cheaper than 1, said Alice in a surprised tone, taking out her purse. "Only you must eat them both if you buy 2. "Then I'll have 1, please," said Alice, as she put the money down on the counter. For she thought to herself, "They might not be nice at all, you know." The sheep took the money and put it in the box, and then said, "I never put things into people's hands. That would never do. You must go and get it for yourself." And so saying, she went off to the other end of the shop, and set the egg upright on the shelf. "I wonder why it wouldn't do," thought Alice, as she groped her way among the many tables and chairs, for the shop was very dark towards the end. "The egg seemed to get further and further away the more I walked towards it. Let me see, is this a chair? Why, it's got branches, I declare. How odd to find a tree growing here. And actually there's a little brook. Well, this is quite the queerest shop I've ever seen." She went on, wondering more and more every step, and everything turned into a tree the moment she came to it, and she quite expected the egg to do the same. And that is the end of our chapter for today. See you next time, readers. Keep reading.